Good afternoon, my name is Wayne Evans. I'm from Wildlife. I'm the Marine Prosecutions Officer. I'm going to attempt a new world speed record today by trying to do 20 slides in 10 minutes. So if I do speak a little fast, please bear with me. What we're going to talk about today is seafood consumer crime, and we're going to look at some case studies in the various compliance strategies that we use to address them. And what do we mean by consumer crime? There isn't really a definition for that, I know because I looked, but for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to take consumer crime to mean those crimes that take place in the formal trade sector, your restaurants, your retailers and your wholesalers, and also your commercial vessels. These are the three basic compliance strategies that we employ to address consumer crime: education, awareness, and enforcement. Now, education and awareness are fairly similar, and they do have commonalities and grounds of overlap, but for the purposes of in a compliance arena, we're going to take education to mean the imparting of knowledge to people or groups or targeted audiences that didn't have that knowledge before. In other words, we're going to teach them something they didn't already know. SASE training, presentations, and education material are part of that kind of strategy. With regards to awareness, that's more use of the media, use of awareness material to highlight existing issues. In other words, issues that the public probably are aware of, but that we wish to highlight and possibly add a bit more information to. Enforcement is, obviously, as you all know, it's a sharp end of the compliance spectrum, and that is where we undertake patrols, inspections, issue fines, and institute prosecutions. Now, each one of these strategies have their own areas in which they work best. In our experience, we've found that education really only works where the targeted audience is a receptive audience. In other words, they're receptive to instituting behavior change within that community or within those individuals. Awareness we found to be a generally effective method across all the spectrums and across the targeted community. And enforcement we found generally works best at the sharp end, at the suspects and at the accused people, who are the targets of our enforcement activities. So how do we decide which of these strategies to apply, or if we want to apply more than one of them, how do we decide in which proportions we're going to apply these strategies when addressing seafood consumer crimes? Let's look at a few case studies. I've got 3 case studies here. They're very different cases, and they will show us how these various methods fared, how they panned out when we used them as a result of these 3 prosecutions. This is a very old case. This dates back to 2000. But this is still one of the most important, iconic milestone cases in the marine environment in KZN, because this case did more than any other to change the behavior of the recreational selling rock lobster and fish to restaurants and hotels. It concerns a LANGOUSTINES-by-the-SEA restaurant, and the timeline goes something like this. In March of 2000, we acted on information. I was still around in those days, and we found 171 East Coast rock lobster in the restaurant freezers. I might point out that at that stage in KZN, restaurants and hotels were stocking East Coast rock lobster fairly freely and with impunity. In October of that year, the shareholder that we arrested, who was also the chef, pleaded guilty, and he got a 30,000 rand fine with another 34,000 suspended. We ran a smallish article in the Mercury. It was the article that you saw on the previous slide. And as a result of that article, the arrest and the consequences spread like wildfire through the restaurant and the hotel community. And in addition to that, that particular restaurant, which is still around today, has remained incident-free for the last 15 years. So what does that show us? As a result of the awareness that was generated by that enforcement action, the effect on the community, on the other restaurants and the hotels, was enormous. And still to this day, that case has done more than any other. More than 1,000 patrols that year could have done to change the behavior of recreationals and restaurants alike, selling and stocking fish and East Coast rock lobster. The enforcement aspect of that strategy worked extremely well on the offender. They have complied to this day. The third strategy, the education part of it, we doubt whether they had received any formal educational presentations prior to that, but the question remains, would that have worked if they had? In that time and in that context, I would say probably not. This is a very recent case, by contrast, of this year. And what makes this case different is that the awareness that was generated by this incident was circulated via social media, which didn't really exist 15 years ago to the extent that it does now. In June of this year, a large fruit and veg chain, which has many outlets over all of the provinces, was found displaying a red-listed fish in one of its outlets. A member of the public took a photo and entered that photo into the social media. We're talking about Facebook, Twitter, fishing forums, blogs, and that blossomed into a huge public debate that spilled over into the media. And what the effect of that was that company immediately reacted like a scalded cat. They issued an apology in public, and they undertook to conform to SASE principles. And as you can see there, the apologies were profuse. And so, in this case, for that particular fish, I don't believe any enforcement action was ever done. But what's very interesting is the response by the offender to that awareness created by the proliferation of the incident in the social media. And that was all it took. That was all it took to produce a response from that company and an undertaking to comply in the future. There was no enforcement action, and there was no previous education. Would they have worked? In this case, I think yes, they would have. The third case study is also a fairly recent case study, an Asian restaurant situated at Ushaka Marine World in Durban. And the timeline looks something like this. May 2009, those staff from that restaurant attended an educational presentation by SASE-trained Ushaka staff. And that was specifically aimed at how to be legal in the seafood industry as a restaurant. In February of 2010, we started receiving information that restaurant was actually buying illegal seafood from recreationals, including lobster and fish. We did an inspection in July, and we found 70 rock lobster, about 60 assorted weeds and seeds of fish, as well as 2 abalone. In March of last year, the owner, Mr. Hong Ping Wu, pleaded guilty. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 30,000 rand effective and a further 150,000 rand suspended. His manager was also dragged into court, 20,000 rand and a further 100 suspended. 10,000 was paid to Ori for restaurant education. They were convicted on a range of charges there, including not having legal invoices. Then we did another inspection in November 2011, and guess what we found? 46 fish, no legal invoices. The owner, Mr. Hong Ping Wu, was charged for a second time. He was present. And that case came before court. Before it could get to trial, however, we did a third inspection. And we found 7 rock lobster on the premises with no permits. Mr. Hong Ping Wu was not in the country, so his head chef took the rap, and he was fined 2,000 rand by the court. When that original case with the 46 fish came to fruition, once again, the same owner pleaded guilty, and he got 20,000 rand and a further 20 suspended on one count of not having a legal invoice for those fish. Just to give you an idea of the depths or of the length that the educators went to show those people how to produce good and legal invoices in the industry, that is what was shown to the people by the SASE educators during their education session. And that is the invoice that they produced for the 46 fish. Okay. So the Emperor's Kitchen case study, if we look at how awareness, enforcement, and education worked with them, doesn't look very good. Awareness didn't work, enforcement didn't work, and education didn't work either. If we had to do another inspection tomorrow on that same premises, well, I'm not quite sure what I would find. What lessons have we can we learn from looking at these types of case studies? And of course, we're speaking in generalities here. There are individual differences. But in general, not all of the regulated community will respond the same way to one or the other type of strategy that we use. We found that all three strategies are needed to work in concert and to work together to ensure effective compliance across the whole of that regulated community. We've also noticed that larger chains and franchises that have a public profile, they have publicly stated codes of ethics and corporate ethics, they respond much faster and much quicker and much more positively to awareness, to education, and to enforcement. Smaller single-owner businesses, in general, are more likely to transgress in response to economic factors, the economic recession. In fact, Hong Ping-Wu stated before court that the reason he had transgressed on so many occasions was not because he couldn't understand English, but because they were financially stressed. That was his reason for transgressing. And we've also found that publishing convictions in the media is a very, very powerful tool. We've been doing it for 15 years, and we still do it. And that's one of the most powerful tools that we have in our compliance responses to consumer seafood compliance. I think that's it. Thanks.